Hello everybody! In today's video I would like to show you something that to my knowledge has never been pointed out by any of the authors writing about Capablanca. As I wrote in my Substack, analyzing and thinking about Capablanca's games and style influenced me tremendously and helped me become a better player. By making this extensive analysis of his games, I discovered a lot of these things that haven't been pointed out in chess literature. And this thing, let's say, I'll call it a trap, that happened in one of his most famous games. The position we see in front of us is from the game against Tartakover from the New York tournament in 1924. Is something that it's a fantastic trap, I think, both a practical and psychological one that I never saw pointed out by in any sources. I hasten to add that I pointed out this idea by Capablanca in my Chessable course on Capablanca's Endgames. You can see the link in the video description if you want to check out that course where I analyze Capablanca's Endgames in great detail. Now, let's go back to the position and see what's going on here. Black's last move was a knight e3 check. Another question here for white is, where does the king go? Does it go to f3 or does it go to g3? And here comes the very subtle psychological understanding that Capablanca had of the chess battle in general. Now, let's think about both moves. After this check on e3, the knight has two options afterwards. One is to go to f5, which it's a great spot because it blocks the bishop's attack on the pawn on g6, and effectively controls and deals with white's kingside majority. Another idea for black is the move knight d1, after which the knight can maybe take on c3 and go after white's queenside. So it's a very sharp endgame where both sides are trying to pursue their own majorities. White is trying to attack on the king side, go after the g6 pawn, force a passed pawn on the king side, whereas black does the same on the queen side, going after the c3 pawn and then perhaps advancing his own pawns. So on the next move, black will have a choice whether to stabilize and defend his king side or go for a very sharp counterattack with knight d1, most likely abandoning the g6 pawn and allowing white to connect it passed pawns. Now in a practical game, this being move 32, players are generally reluctant to allow free-flowing play by their opponents. In this case, what does that mean? Well, if white is allowed to capture that pawn on g6 and then start pushing his two passed pawns, at the same time creating threats against white's king on the king side, this looks very dangerous for the black player, especially over the board. So a more natural reaction for black would be to defend on the king side by putting a knight on f5 and then perhaps using the rook to take that pawn on c3. So a move like knight f5 would be, let's say, a desirable one. So what happens here? Now white's choice, where does the king go? Now if white wants to prevent knight f5, a logical move to play would be king g3. Because knight f5 now is bad. After knight f5, bishop takes f5, g takes f5, king h4, and white simply has a practically winning rook endgame. King h5, g6, then king g5, king f5, and what black feared, losing his remaining pawn on the king side, will happen. And with these two pawns, connected passed pawns, the king also very active, rook very active on the 7th rank, the white obtains a winning rook endgame. That means that after king g3, black must go knight d1, yeah, and seek counterplay on the queen side with extremely sharp play ahead. Now, why does king f3 then? What is the point with king f3 then, right? Well, king f3, it appears that white is just simply inviting knight f5, because after knight f5, yeah, if white takes on f5, then the king is far away from the h4 square, and rook c3 comes with a check, and it appears that white is basically inviting knight f5 and helping black in this case. Yeah. In case black goes knight d1, play would be similar to the line after king g3. So what white does here by playing king f3 is seemingly giving black a choice. The choice being, would you like to solidify your king side with knight f5, or would you go for a sharp play with knight d1? Going back to what I just said, that players are reluctant to allow these threats against their king, two connected passed pawns going forward and so forth, this nudges black, not so subtly, in the direction of the move knight f5. And here lies in the trap. Here lies in the fantastic trap. Now, Tartakover fell for it. He played the natural move knight f5, and we will see what the trap consists of. With this in mind, before showing the refutation of the move knight f5, let's check the objectively best move, which is knight d1. And here white had a choice. Perhaps Tartakover was afraid of the move bishop g6, which appears very promising. A piece sacrifice, but after rook takes g6, rook takes c7, the knight is really completely offside, because the rook protects the c3 pawn. White will likely collect one or two pawns more, which means that he won't really risk losing in spite of being a pawn down, but for now being two pawns, having two pawns for the piece. But perhaps more importantly, white has the idea of simply proceeding with king g4, f5, or king f5, and just going forward with this pawn mass that he has on the king side. This absolutely looks dangerous, especially over the board with little time left on the clock, and it's understandable if black wanted to avoid it. White had another attempt, and this one was pointed out by Alechin in the tournament book, and that is rook h6, attacking the pawn on g6, king f7, and now f5. The pawn will be won because it's pinned, yeah. But after rook c3, f takes, g6, king g8, king e2. Looks also very dangerous for black. Yeah, these two pawns are doubled, but after rook h7, let's say a rook moves, then g7 will start being a threat. And the bishop is quite active. Bishop f5, bishop e6 can quickly also perhaps finish the game. Black has the saving resource knight f2. And in a rook endgame after king f2, rook d3, the pawns are really useless because a single rook cannot support them going forward. Whereas bishop f5, knight e4 lines show that black somehow survives this pretty scary position. So the point is that both white's attempts, Alechin's rook h6 and the piece sacrifice bishop g6, look very dangerous for black, but on a move-by-move basis, very concretely, he manages to survive objectively. So now we understand the reluctance of Tartakover to go into these lines. Yeah. So why not just play the very nice move knight f5? But here Capablanca actually showed that he was luring black to play knight f5, because after the unexpected bishop takes f5, g takes f5, and now king g3, even losing a full tempo, going king f3 and king g3, giving up a pawn on c3 with check, and then later on even losing the pawn on f4, white still obtains a winning rook endgame. The point being that after rook c3, king h4, rook f3, white loses a second pawn, but after g6, the combined efforts of the rook on the 7th rank, the king coming to g5 and f6, and the far advanced g6 pawn mean that white's superiorly coordinated army triumphs over black's scattered pieces in spite of being 2 pawns down. So this was the fantastic trap that Capablanca actually managed to pull off against Tartakover, who, well, fell for it. And now the rook endgame is an exemplary one, very well known, and demonstrates this principle of coordination of the pieces that is very often more important than material advantage. So rook f4, king g5, already threatening king f6. No time to take on d4 because king f6 would lead to mate. And after rook e4, king f6 threatening mate, king g8, rook g7 check first, king h8, rook c7 threatening mate on c8, rook e8 and king f5. White is starting to regain the material. By now it's already equal material, but the pawn on a7, the pawn on d5, they will fall, and white will in fact be material up. So you see how even though starting with 2 pawns down, thanks to the superior coordination, white will actually merge a material up. So the remaining of the moves were rook e4, trying to become active, but king f6 still threatens mate, rook f4 check, king e5 now going after the d5 pawn. The g6 pawn can't win the game by itself because the king is in front of it and the rook is also controlling the 8th rank. So the pawn cannot win alone, but after winning the d5 pawn, the d4 passed pawn will decide the game. So rook g4, g7, king g8, rook a7, just collecting more pawns, and the pawn on d5 will fall, and the rest is really easy. Rook g5, rook g1, king d5, rook c1, now simply the pawn advances, king d6, rook c2, d5, rook c1, rook c7, making sure the c file is in white's hands to allow for the move king c6, rook a1, king c6, rook a4, d6, and the pawn is coming all the way to d8, winning a full rook, and black resigned. So fantastic, I think, demonstration of Capablanca's understanding of psychology, and also obviously good calculation of variations, realizing that he can enter the rook endgame even a full tempo down, losing a couple of pawns in the process, and yet still understand that the rook endgame is winning for him. As I mentioned, this and many more examples of Capablanca's fantastic endgame play can be found in my Chessable course on Capablanca, and as I mentioned in my newsletter, I'm in the process, let's say, of having that course published as a book by New in Chess, and hopefully that will be out later this year, and I hope it makes for a nice present for yourselves and your friends. So we will see how that one goes. I'll keep you posted. In the meantime, thanks for watching this video. Please subscribe, like it, subscribe to my channel, subscribe to my Substack, and stay in touch. Yeah, leave your comments in the comment section. And well, thanks for watching one more time, and more videos coming up pretty soon. Take care.